setting it up again. I'm just trying one more time.
Okay.
This is now streaming on YouTube. That part is working. So I'm going to share this. Okay, go ahead.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. I am so grateful to be able to sit with you tonight. My name is Dr. Jody Carrington. I'm a clinical psychologist, and we put together a workshop series in the last little bit where we can have some hard conversations about some very important things, make this concept of mental health much more accessible to the people in our community who've been so great to us. And tonight, I am going to bring in one of the, I think, most sacred souls in my group. His name is Jeremy Allen. He's a funeral director and a grief expert. And we're going to talk about grief and loss and the heaviness in the holidays. And mostly we're going to talk a lot about joy. I'm going to swear. He might too. So if you have little people around, I want you to be careful about that, because what we need right now is some fucking joy. Okay. And the first thing that I want to start out with tonight, before I tell you a little more about Jer, is to acknowledge where we're coming to you from. This presentation is coming to you live from Treaty 7 land. It's Treaty 7 territory, which is home of the Blackfoot Confederacy. It's now known as the province of Alberta, the central part of the province of Alberta. And it is made up, the Blackfoot Confederacy is made up of the Siksika, the Kainai, the Piikani, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda First Nation, and the Métis Nation Region 3. It is my honor and my privilege, as it is Jer's, to be able to do our work on a land where so much sacrifice was made before we ever got here. And tonight, what we're going to talk a lot about is acknowledgement. And what we're going to talk a lot about is what this means to be able to walk each other home through big, messy, gross stuff that we are all in a state of grief and mourning. So to kick us off tonight, I want to introduce you to the, I don't know if impeccable is a word, the unbelievably brilliant, funny. I never thought like a funeral director and funny should be in the same sentence, but I got to tell you, Jer is such an anomaly in so many ways that he is the one that I knew was going to be right for the incredible people. There's 400 of you that are going to join us tonight. And Jeremy Allen is a funeral director, a funeral home owner. He has this beautiful business with his amazing wife named Bailey. And I've had the opportunity to be in Jer's funeral home. I have had the, oh my gosh, the pleasure of watching him work, of walking people home. I've heard many stories. I've held many of his tears. I think the other disclaimer that you're going to maybe need tonight is we both come with Kleenex ready because when you put us two big emotional people together, I've already been crying. So buckle up. Jer has created a space for people to have a greater understanding about grief, because I think it is such a taboo, scary topic for so many people. It's called Death Ed. And I first met Jeremy when he came to a talk of mine because his father is an educator, and I fell in love with him and his wife and their desire to help people understand that grief is such a part of life. And the more time we spend pushing it away, the harder it will be, the more it pushes us around. And so Jer's going to talk to you a little bit about everything he's learned as a funeral director over the last many years. He's an incredible husband. He has 3 babies of his own. And he's coming to you live tonight from his wife's makeup studio. Jeremy Allen, is this true?
Hey, it is the total truth, all of it. I think the thing that's important for you to know is you're absolutely right, Jode. We have been putting the fun back in funeral directing for almost 18 years here now. And let me tell you, it is a space that I think it's hard for so many people to understand, but it's a space that, as much as it holds incredibly big emotion, which can sometimes be sadness, and is often sadness when people we love die, there's also an incredible amount of joy that accompanies that. And I'm sure we're going to lean into all of that tonight.
We are. And
And
tonight, just I think to preface it, what we're going to speak a little bit about is everything that we can scram into these 2 hours. I want to talk a lot about grief and loss, however you define that, as a pet, as a parent, as a child. Sort of loss happens in all kinds of ways. It is this universal piece. I'm gonna sink into a little bit around the different kinds of loss, why death by suicide versus a long-standing illness, when you sort of that anticipatory grief. You're going to talk a little bit about that. I have a couple of really great quotes that I'm going to share tonight. And I'm going to just sort of toss this one out there first, and then I'm going to hand it over to you to take over. I found this one the other day. It's by Angela Bracken, and she said, "Life tossed us up into the air, scattered us, and we all somehow found our way back home. And we will do it again and again and again." I just have to tell you, as our family is navigating the massive throes of grief right now, I feel like this every single day, that life just tosses us all up in the air. And I'm not sure where we're going to land at the end of any given day, let alone any given hour. And it scatters us in so many ways, emotionally, physically, and somehow, some way we all land back home. And I think that is just such the interesting thing about the waves of grief, that they don't ever last forever in any capacity, but they're relentless. And so I'm going to give you, you're the guy that knows so much, you've seen so much, you've held so many, to take it away and tell us a little bit about this process that I know is become the biggest passion of your heart, the reason you're here on this earth.
yeah, well, I will.
Take it away, Jer.
I will begin with gratitude. I think as in any environment where we're just invited to share this lens and this perspective and our experience of grief, it comes with a grateful heart. I just deeply recognize how meaningful these conversations are. And the thing that's still sometimes takes my breath away is the way that we get to gain this knowledge is from families like yours who trust people like me to join you in this space. And so I think just starting with this gratitude of just deeply recognizing and appreciating the trust that we are shown as funeral directors when we're invited into your lives in such a time of uncertainty to try to help walk you home. And so excited to share just this lens and this experience and this perspective of how I've been able to take some of these lessons and bring them outward in a way that hopefully will just help you feel like you don't have to carry this all by yourself as we enter into the holidays. And so I'm going to lean right in, and I'm excited. And Jody already did some of our disclaimers, and Jody did some of the things, but let me just expand on the introduction a little bit. So for those of you that are meeting me virtually for the first time, my name is Jeremy Allen. I'm a funeral director, embalmer, and funeral home owner in rural Alberta. And tonight, I've just been invited to join you to share with you for 25 or 30 minutes, trying to just lend you some of that experience and some of that lens that we've been offered from families like yours. To create a little bit more context, I grew up here in rural Alberta, not the town that we live in, but not far from here. I like to reference that I was a part of what was called the non-academic sector growing up. School was never my thing, but I grew up from a lineage of educators. My dad was a teacher, my grandpa was a teacher, my uncle was a teacher and superintendent. And so when we were 16 and 17 years old, being asked what I thought I wanted to do for the rest of my life, my answer was to become a teacher or maybe to become a youth pastor. Teaching didn't make sense because I still don't like school. Being a youth pastor didn't make sense. I still drink and swear too much. But all these years later, it's really unique because I landed in the space that allows me to teach people about things that I'm really passionate about. So that is the foundation of my gratitude in being here tonight. So I've been in the funeral profession for almost 18 years, for most of my adult life. And I think what I want to do, I want to be mindful of time tonight. I want to be able to again recognize that we are here to talk about your hardest days, and that we are here to talk about some of the hardest things. And so we're going to be intentional in our instruction. It'll only be about 25 to 30 minutes of time that I'll spend speaking tonight. Jody already did the triggers depending on which stories they tell and how we end up talking about it. Definitely I like to sometimes include what I call Joe Exotic language. So there's a disclaimer with that. But the other part is I absolutely know that these stories and these experiences are going to align with some of your own experiences. Not to say that they are the same, but there are going to be parallels, and with that can be triggers. And so just wanting you to feel supported. I really recognize who I believe is here today. And we have people here that are watching that have been walking through and with their grief for days and weeks and months and years. And then we're going to have a group of you that are here that have just entered your grief, that are learning that this is not going to be a fast or an easy process, no matter how hard you try to simplify it. And then I know that there's a group watching tonight that are waiting in the stands for it to be their turn to sit in the front pew. The helpless bystanders to their own health or to someone they love that is going through something difficult. And here's what I need you to know. Each of you here tonight are seen, that you are important, that you are welcomed here, and that we acknowledge you in this space. And this space is safe. This space is meant for us to bring our individual experiences to in a common goal of being together. I think by all respects, what we're learning to do here tonight is how to practice our grief more outwardly, and really by which definition is mourning. And I think that's something Joe's going to talk about a little bit more. I just want you to know that in whatever ways are appropriate and in whatever ways you are comfortable with, thank you for choosing to join us in this sacred part of your life. My goal for tonight is to try to create more understanding of what grief and loss is so that we can better identify loss personally, which ultimately will increase our opportunity to apply empathy to ourselves and to the people that we love at a much higher level as we try to enter these holidays together. Yeah? So let's dive in. I'm going to be looking off screen just at my time, just to make sure that I'm being mindful of space here tonight. But I think that the most appropriate entry point into our conversation tonight is really learning what is grief. And you know, if we go online and we ask Google and we get these things, you know, there's a number of different ways to explain it. But I think what I've learned at the highest level is grief is our emotional and behavioral response to loss, not specifically to death. North American grief culture has ultimately been non-existent, and we're just starting to enter this space where we're learning to talk about it, you know, especially outside of the comfort of our homes or outside of the comfort of our nuclear relationships. And I think what I want to make sure that is included in this is, I know, like, I was able to hop on the chat earlier and be paying attention to some of the conversations that had already started there. And I know there's a lot of people here tonight as a result of somebody they love that have died. But I've also started to read the comments about people that have had a diagnosis with MS, the people that have had a diagnosis that we know that life is going to end, but we're in this awkward purgatory of not knowing what to expect from now till then. And all of these things are changing around us. Even though I can still see you, even though I can still hold you, there's all of these things that have already changed in anticipation of that loss. And so with grief being our emotional and behavioral response to loss, what I wanted to do is maybe to teach you about the two types of grief that I'm most familiar with, which is anticipatory grief and bereavement grief. And ultimately, I'm just going to talk about this through circumstance, talk about this through stories, and talk about this in a way that hopefully just allows you to see maybe the parallels that exist from these stories into some of your own experiences. And so for me, anticipatory grief is really when we have the opportunity to prepare for loss, right? So we've been given that time and we know that loss is imminent, and we know that it is something that we should start to get our ducks in a row for, but then we find that that moment comes and we actually aren't ready at all, right? So the difference of being prepared versus being ready. And I think the way for me to best create context to this is, I think of my grandma that struggled with Alzheimer's. And I remember the steps of just watching this part of her deteriorate. And this was the grandma for me that remembered our birthdays. And my mom came from a family of 11. So like that was quite a feat. Like she had over 50 grandchildren and, you know, remembered all of their names, and she remembered all of their spouses' names, and she remembered our birthdays. And on our birthdays, we would get a card. And so like this lady was phenomenal in the way that she was so intentional about relationship and so intentional about making sure she acknowledged each of us within this big family. And then this great big sneaky thing called Alzheimer's snuck in and started to steal her from us over a period of time. And we watched her physical presence continue to thrive. But while that all took place, we just watched her slip away. And, you know, for years, we had conversations with ourselves and with one another about how this wasn't the lady that we knew, and how hard it was to watch her, you know, physically be present, even though emotionally and mentally she was no longer with us. And so by all rights, we had years to prepare for her loss. We had years to get ready for what it would be like when that physical presence joined that other missing presence. And the reality is I remember the night that my grandma passed away. And this is one of the unique parts about being a funeral director in a rural community. The way that I found out is I got the call from the hospital that my grandma had died. And it was my responsibility to go to bring her back to the care of the funeral home. And for me, I think important to preface that with a recognition of this is my love language. The opportunity to take care of somebody that helped take care of me my whole life was something that was very meaningful to me. And I remember going to the funeral home. I remember it was early it was early morning, like it was after midnight. I remember going to the funeral home and gathering our things and getting the stretcher and making my way to the hospital. And I remember preparing for this, you know, spending time thinking about what it would be like to take care of my grandparent. And I remember getting to the room and getting to the doorway, and I remember looking in and seeing my grandma's lifeless body there, and I was just immediately a grandson. That regardless of the time that I felt like I had spent preparing for that moment, I just immediately recognized being prepared does not equal being ready. That when we experience loss, it is as simple as relationship. Yeah. And I share that with you from the space of recognition that anticipatory grief can be something that really honors parts of the relationship. I think we pay attention differently when we are given such a specific timeline, or when we know there is a specific end in sight. Just don't create an expectation that you should have been more ready for when that happened, right? And then I think of bereavement grief. I think of all these families who are navigating loss where there was no time to prepare, where we get the phone call that mom or dad, or God forbid, our sons and our daughters or our spouses, when people die by suicide, when people die unexpectedly in car accidents. And, you know, I had an opportunity to connect with Jody on this earlier. And I think one of the things I appreciate so much about these conversations is the way that we are still learning. That one is not better than the other. That my grief is not more difficult than your grief. That your loss is the biggest loss because you're the one that's missing that person so much. So the goal of setting these spaces and creating these examples and starting to learn how to talk about them outwardly isn't to create a scale of comparison. I don't believe comparison is a tool that serves us well in environments of grief, but it is to learn how to acknowledge these different spaces, because here's what happens when we learn to acknowledge. Grief is also this really wonderful space where two contrasting emotions can live in the same environment and sometimes as a part of the exact same moment. So when I think of that walk into the hospital, and I think of standing in that doorway, and I think of what it felt like to see my grandma in that bed and know that her physical presence was gone, I remember feeling completely devastated that she had died. And at the exact same time, completely relieved that that part of her life was over. That my sadness was met with joy, and that both of those emotions were allowed to have a seat at the table, and both of them were equally important, right? So, like, listen, we're diving right in. I told you, we're not taking it slow tonight. I've only got 30 minutes, and I usually spend about 3 hours talking about this. So we just don't have time to hold back. And here's what I know for each of you. If you were vulnerable enough to join us in this space, you didn't come here to talk about the weather. So we're just going to keep diving in. I know this past year in so many ways has just been really heavy for so many people. And I've just learned so many lessons from being willing to be a part of these conversations, from being willing to sit in the discomfort. One of my favorite people right now, and continues to be and likely will be forever, is Brene Brown. Brene Brown talks about discomfort over resentment. And it's when we learn how to sit in the discomfort of meaningful and difficult conversation in pursuit of knowing that will become the tool that removes the opportunity for long-term resentment attached to grief. If we do not choose to sit in these conversations, if we do not choose to be a part of the things that are so hard for us and learn how to have a voice in those environments, it will be the thing that eventually also hurts us and begins to cripple us as we try to navigate this walk through grief, right? And so when we specifically start to talk about this time of the year, when we really start to talk about, these individual environments that we are coming from and the individual stories that we have to tell, I think the thing that becomes really important is also to link it back to the universal things that we experience as a part of life and in turn as a part of grief, right? I was incredibly fortunate to learn from this really special soul this past year. And she taught me about this idea that outside of the people that I love the most, outside of Bailey and Harper and Dylan and Bowen and this nuclear family that holds my entire heart, there are 3 other things that I require to live what I would call wholeheartedly. And that's time and health and money. And here's what's really difficult about this lesson. I look at these as like a triangle, right? That they're each an equal commodity in my life. And, time is a commodity, health is a commodity, money is a commodity. And, very famous saying is that money doesn't buy happiness. And I align with that. I recognize money will not be the tool that exclusively provides happiness to you, but it is the tool that provides accessibility to the people and the places and the things that we enjoy to do. We recently moved to an acreage and we've started buying horses and sheep and animals. And I'm telling you, this is not a space that happens without cost, even though it provides joy, right? But here's the neat part about this. What I've learned from being a funeral director, and I think what I've learned at such a young age, is that we're only ever offered 2 of the 3 at once. Typically, we only have accessibility to 2 out of those 3 commodities at any given time. I think back to being 18 years old or 20 or 25 years old, having accessibility to lots of time, having accessibility to lots of health, never had fucking money to do anything, right? And then I think to the stage that I'm getting to now, I turned 38 in 2023, starting to have accessibility to, the affordability to do things with my family. For the most part, I still have full accessibility to my health. I'm in control of my health, but constantly in pursuit of more time to enjoy those things with my family. And then I think of the steps that we get to where I watch my mom and dad get to, where the year that my mom retired was the year that she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so her first few years of retirement were spent in treatments and trying to get her health back. So at a time in her life where she had the accessibility to time and she had the accessibility to money is where she lost access to the commodity of health. And I'm sharing that with you tonight because I think the importance of that lesson is as we reflect in these moments, as we reflect on these experiences, as you look back and as you look forward, I want you to start to look for the spaces in which you have access to all 3. I want you to think about the people that you love the most, and I want you to think about the places that you love the most, and I want you to think about the things that provide you joy. And I want you to figure out where in your life that you can align the time and the health and the money to figure out where to do those things. And it might not be a 3-week vacation. It might just be for an afternoon, or it might just be for a weekend, or maybe it is for 2 weeks, or wherever the amount of time and money and health that you have availability to at the same time. I want you to start chasing those opportunities like the sun is setting. Because here's what I know. When we sit with families, when we reflect backwards on what life was like, when we no longer have the opportunity to continue to pursue these experiences, nobody sits at the table and tells me how they wish they would have just worked one more day, and how they spent just too much time with the people that they love, and how they just wish they would have spent less time with friends, right? These are not things that we want. So we have to start to recognize our opportunity to actively choose a way to begin to do it differently. And for those that are here watching tonight that are in your grief at whatever stage, there's probably nobody more knowing of the truth of that reality than you. There's nobody that is more aware of the commodity of time than somebody that has experienced loss, right? So this really connects me to this idea, because like for me, what this all is it's this sense of discovery. It's like these audits that I try to do within my own life, and then I try to like sure that I apply this to the people that I love the most and into these core relationships in my life. But in order for me to do that and be mindful of these people that I love so much, there has to be a process in which we go inward before outward. Are you with me? So I think of the time of the year that we're in. I think of the reality that we are, living in a time where we have accessibility to incredible amounts of knowledge and information, that we walk around with these phones in our pocket, that we have computers literally almost attached to us now, where we have the accessibility to gain information at any given second of the day, right? And I know for me personally, this last few years has been on this journey towards like having boundaries and setting up relationships in a way that I try not to go into spaces that I know don't make me feel good. And so, typically from January until November is when we have the opportunity to practice that at a very high level, and we can sometimes get really good at it. And then December rolls around, and these family rituals and these family traditions and these generational expectations start to resurface. And all these people that did their best to support you all year long now need something from you because it's the holidays, right? Maybe not for all of you, but I'm guessing for a lot of you, this is probably ringing quite true. So what's so hard about this is when we enter into that from this lens of grief, sometimes we have nothing left to give. Sometimes we're showing up with a half-empty cup versus a cup that runneth over with joy and happiness because Christmas is around the corner and I just can't wait, where in fact, I just wish it wasn't happening at all this year. And so in this wave of self-care and taking care of ourselves and understanding and building these relationships with our inward, I just want to encourage you to continue to pursue that as you enter the holidays. You always have a choice. You get to choose the spaces that are safe for you as you come into this holiday season. You get to choose the people that are meaningful to you as you come into this holiday season. You have a choice in this, and it is this inward before outward idea. Yeah. And I think all of this comes into this mentality of again, for me is what I like to say, this inward before outward. How do we get to the idea that I truly put myself first in a way that isn't received as selfish, right? And I have an inward before outward process, and this is something I talk about in depth. So I'm going to try to give you the Coles Notes versions of it. But ultimately, it's what I like to call my order of service. And it's my little play on words from being a funeral director, where when we go to the church or we go to the hall or we go to the place of where this place of remembrance is going to be, and whoever the officiant is or the MC is or whoever, typically they have penciled out what to expect as the service unfolds, right? This is the song we're going to walk into. This is where everybody's going to sit. This is when I need to turn the lights off to make sure that everybody can see the slideshow. All of these different things, very predictable. And what I've learned is there's comfort in predictability. And so all I simply did is I took this and I rerouted it in a way that said like, geez, this really helps me in this professional setting. Certainly there must be a way to reapply this to my personal life. And it became incredibly useful, especially in environments of grief. I'm going to share with you tonight a story about my friend Ian. Ian is bigger than life. When you were in his presence, you felt like you didn't belong because he was just so amazing. But at the exact same time, you felt like you were right where you were supposed to be because he knew how to treat you. And Ian was kind, and he was funny, and he was mindful. And he cared about the people that he loves. What I didn't know was that this person that could be all of those things could also at the same time be struggling in a way that didn't allow him to feel like he could continue to live in this world among these people that he loved so much. And I remember getting the text that Ian had died. So Ian died by suicide. And I remember when I heard that he had completed suicide, and I remember like just stopping in my tracks, because as I tried to reverse engineer this end result of all of these things that he struggled with, I just couldn't make sense of it. But I'm learning that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to learn to sit with the emotion that accompanied losing somebody I love who died by suicide. And this brings me back to this space because I remember when Ian died, and I remembered my instinct was to go into funeral director mode. But before I could do that, I had to honor this part of myself that held friendship with Ian, that held meaning with Ian. I had to honor the parts of myself that recognized that in order for me to go outward, I also had to realize that one of my friends dying so sadly and so suddenly was also going to have tremendous impact on the people that I love the most, which is my wife and my children. I had to learn how to pause in those parts of the experience before going outward. And that is no easy feat. If you are built like me at all, it is more comfortable to take care of other people than it is to take care of yourself. Because I'm much better at taking care of you than I am at taking care of myself. But what I'm learning as life continues to fly by is that if we do not learn how to take care of ourselves, it is impossible for us to take care of the people we love the most at our fullest capacity, right? And so if we are going to continue into this space of moving into the holidays where we desire to show up in these relationships that mean so much to us, please make sure that at some point in time before then, you create space and honor all of these parts of your loss that continue to be so difficult for you, and acknowledge them in a way that allows you to truly show up for yourself, so that when you are with these friends and when you are with this family, if that's where you choose to be, that is going to be the tool that actually allows you to become present. Yeah. I feel like I'm getting near the end of my time. Jode, are you there? Are you by?
I'm by. Keep going. You're doing great.
Cool. So, listen, I think I'm going to just sign off with like one little final point. And I think it's a point that I would want each of you to know is incredibly important and that all of you possess simply by just being here. Nights like tonight require incredible vulnerability. It is not easy to sign up for something, even if it's online, that you know is going to rip your heart out. But here's what's really special about vulnerability. It's this little superpower that nobody ever talked about, that traditionally was looked at as a weakness, that historically was viewed as something that we didn't want to bring to the surface because it served no purpose to us in times of sadness. But that's just not true. Vulnerability is the ultimate strength. Vulnerability requires us to show up in a way that allows us to become connected, right? So vulnerability leads to connection. Once we connect, we begin to build trust. If I can start to build trust with you, it will lead to a relationship. And if I can create a relationship with you, you'll truly allow me to join you in this space. So signing off from this part of the night in the same way that I started, with gratitude. Thank you for inviting me and thank you for allowing me to join you in this space. I recognize the courage it takes to be here and I'm looking forward to the rest of the night with you.
Jer, come on. I love it. I love it. And I know we get to jump into almost like an hour of question and answer. So I'm going to just take it from here. Here's the interesting thing to me about having these conversations, these hard conversations during the holidays. Okay. And the whole reason why we wanted to pick this time to have these conversations, because expectations fuck us up. Okay. Expectations is supposed to be glorious this time, this holidays, this December, this frolicking and Christmas and holiday and celebrations and joy and presents and shit. And typically when it's wrought with so much emotion, it is so much, the potential for letdown is so much greater. And when we don't feel it, when we don't see it in another, when we don't feel like we should be showing up, when we're letting our kids down because we're sad about something else, or we're missing the people that we love the most, and why has it been 5 years and I'm still not fucking over it? Or why am I still in the middle of grief and I cannot find any joy? What am I going to miss? They wouldn't want me to be this, like they wouldn't want me to be sad about this. And how do I get on with it? And how do I move on? Oh, this is exactly why we wanted to spend some time tonight talking about grief and loss, because here's what there's a couple of things I want you to remember tonight. This is the interesting thing to me about grief and loss. Okay, so Jer was talking a lot about vulnerability, and I'm going to just lay it on the line a little bit tonight because you took the chance on hanging out with us for tonight, and I'm going to tell you that I am in a massive state of trying to navigate our own grief and our own family tonight. And I think it is amazing to me what an isolated process this is, despite the fact that it is a universal experience. It is an isolated process. I was in the hospital today, the Foothills Medical Center, and I was watching people go in and out. I was, noticing in the ambulance bay, people coming in and out and navigating, their losses, leaving there. Some people leaving there with new babies, some people sort of coming in knowing that they were never going to leave with the person that they brought in. And it took my breath away, because everybody on here tonight is in a state of grief or mourning. Everybody you see. The difference sometimes is in the acuity of it. And so when you're in an acute phase of loss, when you're in an acute phase of grief, it's the stuff that debilitates your functioning. It's the stuff that takes away, that steals the joy, that makes it so much harder to fucking choose it and to be able to sit with people and like all of that stuff, huh? That the acuity of it that is so what matters to me so much about this process of grief that is so universal. And so I want to talk a little bit about, I think for me, the experience around grief and mourning, okay? Because those are two very different things. And if you've ever heard me speak before about this process, I will tell you that grief, as Jared defined it, is the universal loss, the universal response to loss, okay? You are born, if you're old enough to love, you're old enough to grieve. Okay, I'll tell you this one more time. If you're old enough to love, you're old enough to grieve. And I want to talk about kids and grief and navigating our children through grief and doing all of these kind of things, because if you're old enough to love, as I watched our babies go stand beside their grandmother, who is way too young in this moment in our time together, and tried to tell her how much they love her and what this is going to be like to sort of live life without her. I think that it is so fascinating to me that if you are old enough to love, you are old enough to grieve. Okay. Grief is a universal response to loss. It is defined by the things that take your breath away. It is defined by the things that just when you think you're fine, you hear the song and it fucking drops you to your knees. You smell pierogies. You see the picture. You do the things, yeah, that go, oh, that's grief. You can't stop it. I wish there was a pill for grief, because I promise you we'd all be fucking on it. Okay. Sometimes it looks like booze or drugs, because we want to numb that relentless feeling of like this, that just, you did not think you could ever feel that much pain in your whole days. Okay. And if you've ever sat in the front row of a funeral, if you've ever sat in your car and cried your fucking face off, that has just been my experience. I've been surprised by the magnitude that grief brings with it sometimes. Yeah, I'm a psychologist. I've studied this. I've talked about it. I've wrote about it, and it is an unbelievably powerful force, this thing called grief. And I think that you can, as Jared talked about, fret for it, wonder about it, think about it. What if you get that call in the middle of the night? What is it going to be like if somebody leaves you unexpectedly? What if you sort of know that even this person is struggling with addiction? We might not have them forever. What if somebody has got diagnosed with cancer? Okay, and you're given the timeline 3 to 6 months, 10 to 2 years, like whatever, I don't even know. Then we sort of like, okay, we can hang on. Grief is the bitch that takes you out at the knees when you least expect it. Okay. So let's put grief over here, because that you cannot get out of it. If you're here, if you have a heartbeat, you will experience grief in this lifetime. The acuity of it often depends on the time of the loss, the age of the loss, the circumstances of the loss. It does not make your loss better than mine. Comparison is the thief of all joy. Jared talked about that tonight, but I got to tell you that the tragic nature of some losses makes that acuity blow up. Okay. Death by suicide is one of those experiences that absolutely is fucking debilitating, because oftentimes I will say this all the time, it is not always a surprise. Okay. Because oftentimes when people struggle with this concept of ending their own life, it doesn't sometimes come out of the blue. And what that means for the people who have circled that person and tried desperately to walk them home and check on them and lean into them and do all those things that the fucking people say all the time now. People do that, and you can still lose somebody you love by suicide. You can. There's this beautiful quote that I found yesterday, because I don't know if any of you follow social media, but Ellen DeGeneres' DJ, a Dancing with the Stars alum, Stephen Twitch boss, who I was an avid follower of, his dance moves, his relationship with his wife and his children, and just his light in this world was something that I often found joy in some of the times that I struggled with the most, died by suicide yesterday. And so social media yesterday and today has been wrought with like, check on your friends, lean in, pay close attention. And I came across this quote yesterday that really made me think about this. Okay. It's by Warsan Shar. And he says, you have to understand, no one leaves home unless the water is safer than the land. And I love that, because so many times it does not matter what we do, what we step into, how should we always, oh my God, do we need now more? This is how we're going to end tonight's talk about our ability to lean in to each other is so necessary now more than ever. But when we talk about the trajectories of how people leave this world, the sudden and tragic guilt-induced process of suicide, it is the scariest. It is the worst. Fuck, I don't even like the way the word sounds. Suicide. Who made that word? That word is fucking dumb, because it doesn't even. It sounds bad, or like that. But here's the interesting. I don't know. Interesting. The thing that sort of crushes my soul a little bit. The mental health crisis that is surrounding us will put so many of us, in fact, probably all of us on this call tonight, in a position of walking families, systems, ourselves, our partners, our brothers, our sisters, our children through something that is very much related to this world, this word, I mean. And what I want you to know is that when we drop our shoulders and think about this process so much, the acuity of grief that accompanies a death by suicide is massive. And I don't think we talk about it enough. Jer spoke a little bit about the anticipatory grief that happens when somebody you die has been given a terminal diagnosis, okay? Or they have experienced Alzheimer's. If you can watch the deterioration happen, sometimes there is that wishing for them to go. Sometimes there is that observation of losing pieces of them, right? So you are grieving their loss, even as you watch them in front of you. Yeah, you can touch them and feel them and talk to them, but the process of anticipatory grief it's grief of the same family. It just looks so much different. The acuity of it is prolonged, and it is never, ever, ever. You are never prepared for the day that it finally happens. The last breath. You can think about it all you want. Oh my gosh, my husband and I talk about this so much in this last couple of weeks as we watch his mama. It is the intention that if we get ready for it, when the final breath comes. But I promise you, nobody's prepared for that final breath. Even if there's the permission to go, even if there's those conversations around, we will take it from here, look after us from above. That final breath, there's always a pumping of the brakes. Because grief is that universal response to loss that we cannot stop, right? We are wired for connection. And when that connection, the life and death connection, is severed, it is fucking debilitating. Okay. The third, obviously, when we talk about, sudden losses, again, in the acuity of losing somebody to an accident when there's no preparatory factors. Sometimes when we have the time leading up to that to make sure that the affairs are in order, that the things are happening, even when you have the timeline, there is not the conversation. Should we talk about it? No. Do we want to talk about the fact that, are the papers signed? Is the will in order? No, even though we have such a fear of stepping into conversations where the finality of death is on the table. 54% of all people in this moment don't have a will. The only thing that we know for sure is that you're going to die. The only thing that we know for sure on this time, in this planet, is that we only have so many heartbeats left. All of us. We know this is the only thing we know to be true. But so many of us don't want to talk about it, which means we don't have a script to talk about it, which means when we walk our kids through this process, they don't have a script, but they're watching. And I have to tell you, what is so critically important is the days surrounding death. They matter way more than death itself. And that leads me into this process of mourning, because mourning is how you heal. Mourning is how you heal. Mourning is the stories, is the celebration. It is the stuff that is wrought with joy. It is the reason that relationship came into your life. I often talk about this. Mitch Albom said this: death ends a life, not a relationship. I often talk about my Rhea, who lost her battle to cancer at age 44. I think about life without her physical being in this world, how I can't laugh to my toes about the way that she used to make me do that. But Mitch Albom said, death ends a life, not a relationship. When they die, your best friend or your partner or your husband or your mom, the relationship does not leave you. That is, I think, the greatest solace that I've ever found lately in this process of grief. The other solace that happens that becomes particularly important to lean into in this time of a holiday season is where do we find the fucking joy in all the pain? And the joy often comes in the morning. Okay, the joy often comes in the morning. I'm going to tell you a little story real quick about this. Okay, so indeed, there is so many of us that adore my mother-in-law. And as I watch her struggle significantly, you know, we have walked through some incredibly difficult moments in these last couple of weeks. And I was at the hospital with her the other night, and I was trying to help her relax. Okay. And her body is not going to let her do that because there's so much going on for her in this moment. And so I'm talking her through it as we would anybody else. And as Jared said, my God, I love to be in this process of caretaking. I don't want to fix all the pain of people. I don't want to feel my own, which is fucking fine. And maybe we'll do that in a minute here, but I like to go there. So I'm laying with her and I'm petting her. She said, are you petting me like a dog? She's like, you don't even like dogs. I'm like, you're right. So I said to her, I want you to relax, Nana. Wiggle your toes. Just sink into the bed. You're okay. I got you. And she looked at me and she said, because she's having a little bit of trouble speaking, I'm not doing fucking yoga, Jody. Okay. Here we are. We're not doing fucking yoga. Sorry. I'm just trying to help. Okay. There are 1,000,001 stories about the people who have blessed us with their presence that sometimes mourning is all about. Because what complicates grief and mourning also that we don't often talk about is anger. When people are leaving us either I noticed a lot in your comments tonight about MAID, about people, you know, sort of medically assisted death. Coming to a place where we are in that process of, you know, the availability these days of sort of walking our loved ones through this process of choosing. When we think about people leaving us, you know, by suicide, when we think about why did the person who served so beautifully in this world get wrought with cancer from head to toe, the anger that fucking comes in this process is also something that we don't talk a lot about. Anger for me is the emotion that is infused into the grief and the mourning side of things, right? Because you can be really fucking mad at people for leaving you and having to take things from here, right? When they were supposed to be the ones, you know, even tonight, I have to tell you this, I just forget so much about how we are wired for connection and how sometimes we take things for granted. You know, I was preparing for this talk tonight and, I was thinking about just in this moment, Lori is still here, but I was thinking about so many times when I would do a talk like this, she had it. She had the kids to hockey practice and she handled everything. And this was the first night that she didn't. And she's still here. But how we manage grief and mourning, you know, I had this chuckle on the way here through tears about the fact that the irony that we're going to talk about this, that nobody really fucking knows how to do this grief and mourning process because we're all in the middle of it. And how we can laugh and cry and navigate the whole thing. The part that concerns me the most is when you stop telling the stories, when you stop leaning into the conversations. And I think one of the biggest things that, you know, if Jared and I can leave you with anything, you know, at the end of tonight is really the idea for me around it is the days surrounding the death that matter so much. Okay. Even if the person you're thinking about tonight is has been gone from this planet for 35 years, right? It doesn't matter, right? It is the things, the experiences, the stories, the saying their name. And you know what? I can see the chat tonight. I would love you to tell me the names of the people that are on your heart tonight. Either if they've left this earth or they're in the process of doing it, you know, put their names out into the world. Because here's the three things that I really want to leave you with tonight that I think is so critically important as we navigate this process through the holidays. And I hope that, I mean, I'm not even sure that our family system is going to get this right, but I will tell you, here's the three things that I know to be true. If I put on my psychologist hat, it's a whole different thing when we're fucking, you know, Jared talked about being a funeral director versus being a grandson. I'm a very, very good psychologist. I don't think I'm very good at saying goodbye to the people I love. I know the script. I know the plan. I got it. I'm not good at it. And so tonight, as we sit here, I see Matthew and Bev and Tanner and Jesse's dad, Bill Bell, a teacher for 35 years, the best man, Eric, Rhonda's son, Eric, somebody's dad, Mike, Haley, the mom, Linda, Cheryl, Jane, your baby, Harvey, would have been your father-in-law, Charles, your dad, Glenda, your grandpa, Eric, your dad, Ray, your Adley, brother Craig, my mom Iris, Joseph and Mike. These are all people who were Doug, Ken, who were so remarkably loved. Corey, Cindy Lou, Aiden, Lanny. I love that we get to hold space for them tonight. Your nephew Zach and your husband Jason, Wally. Oh, look at this case, Grandpa Al, Dad Colin. I love this. Your mom Margot, your best friend Logan, Nancy, your mom. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you get to honor them tonight and that I get to know their names, because if you are brave enough to show up for them, I know how much they meant to you. And here's the interesting thing about grief, right? It is I said this at Ria's funeral. I remember this because I was like, you know, if the depth of grief is any representation to how much we love somebody, I said this, you know, you were fucking lucky, okay? Because if this is how much I loved you, if the magnitude of, you know, pulling over to the side of the road and sobbing, if the magnitude of wondering how, you know, you can ever hang another ornament on a Christmas tree or get through the next birthday without them, if that is the amount of, if that is anywhere equal to the amount of time or space or energy that they were loved, then God damn it, that's why we're here, right? Because we don't get out of here alive, right? And so if you feel that greatly about somebody, if you feel like, if you oh, your daughter Jillian, I love to see these notes. If you get to, you know, feel the depth of that as you navigate through this holiday season, and remember the joy in those stories and those relationships, then I think that is so much about, you know, the purpose behind so much of this stuff. Okay. And so here's the three things. I know we want to step in with Jer and I right around now. But I want to tell you, grief is that universal response. Mourning is how you heal. Mourning is the stories, it's the laughter, it's the making, the recipes, it is the setting the table. So the one thing I want you to think about a lot of times this holiday season is, number one, you need to name it. Okay. And if it is not a place in your family system where people talk about them, or it's not something, I want you to write their name. I want you to say it to strangers. I want you to tell stories about it. You have to name the process of grief, because when you identify it and it has some place to go, it will not kick you around. You see, anxiety, depression, a complicated grief response, whichever the fuck that means, that will not kill you. but not talking about it is the thing that fucks us up the most. Okay. And so when you have somewhere to put it, and some people say, oh my God, I only relentlessly talk about this person. I'm driving everybody nuts because all I want to do is talk about them. Listen, if you have that wherewithal or that noticing, write about it. Go for a walk and talk about it. I talk to Rhea more now than I did when she was here because of husbands and babies and doing kind of things. And when I think about picking up the phone to call her, when I think about, what it would be like to sort of navigate that process, I just talk to her. So saying it out loud, I think, is part of the most important thing. I want you to name it. Particularly, again, when you talk about the acuity of grief, if you've buried your own baby, if you have walked that journey, my friend Jess Jansen has written a book about that. If I think about, one of the people who have become one of the women I think about all the time, my Leanne, who buried her husband and her baby Madeline, on the same day. I think about the acuity of that grief and how it is so unbelievably amazing to me how people continue to go on in this world. And I think so much about it is having some place to put it. Okay. Somewhere to put those things really matters. So I want you to name it. Okay, this holiday season. Number 2, I want you to celebrate them if that's possible. And even if you're mad, if there was pieces about them that you want to throw punch, if you were like, this, I'm not even happy about this part of them or this choice or that choice or when they used to do this, that's okay. You do that, it's okay. But here's some things that people often talk about in terms of celebration. And I know Jared's going to sort of follow up on this a little bit more, but I think about, just simple things, right? Like lighting a candle, sending a letter, setting a dinner spot for them, making their favorite recipe, saying their name. I think that's what's really critical. The other thing that I really so appreciate, can I tell you this, is when people show up. It maybe isn't always the right time. And I've said this for years, if you ever doubt it, just go. And I got to tell you, sometimes it isn't the appropriate time, but an offer of service is never lost. An offer of support is never lost, even if it isn't the right moment. So when the casserole is dropped off or you show up for lunch, this is interesting. My team, which is made up of some of the most kindred souls I've ever met on this planet, my baby girl was home from school this week because she was sick and she wasn't sick. We just needed to be in the same place. And up, in the front door comes Marty and Dale and Stacy and everybody who sort of puts together John and Tennille, and there's food and snacks and we laugh and tell some stories for 20 minutes. And what the best part about that was for me is that my little girl got to watch that because we don't have scripts for how we're supposed to do these things and we can't tell them, we have to show them. Okay. And I love this. How do we talk about people without showing all the emotion? I think my kids think I'm crazy when I talk about my dad and my papa. Amanda, if you are sad, then be sad. If it crushes your soul, they need to know that too, right? And it's interesting because it won't always be that way. And I didn't really trust this in the process of grief, but it really won't always be that way. And there will be moments where you can lean into the joy and the stories that don't often start out with the life-sucking, sobbing, snot-inducing tears, okay? But I think what we get scared is the most is when we have too much emotion, we just stop. We stop celebrating, we stop talking. And if it doesn't feel right after 2 months or 4 months or 5 years or 25 years to be able to talk about them without crying, then we stop. That's the problem. Okay. Death ends a life, not a relationship. Celebrate them, name it, celebrate them. And the third thing I really want you to talk about, that I really want to leave you with, is on purpose. I want you to find joy. On purpose. If you call them in, I love this, and it always depends on what you believe, and I will honor whatever you believe to be true. But I think when you look for the moments of joy, they're fucking everywhere. when you look for pieces of them, what they hope and wish for you, the notes, the song, the coincidences that appear to happen. Man, I'm such a believer in this. And if you're not, that's okay too. But I just got to tell you, I mean, even the most unbelievingers amongst us, it's remarkable that when you need, I don't know, people call it a sign or a note, that leaning into some of those funny stories, belly laughing about those things that they used to do or used to say, is the things that allow us to heal. Because grief is this open wound that requires joy and light and stories and the mourning to allow us to heal. It is a universal process. It is a thing that we were never, ever, ever meant to do alone. And if we let it, it will isolate us horrifically. Okay. And I think that what is interesting the most is that the pain that is associated with grief instinctually asks us to step away from it. It instinctually makes us do this. We don't want to talk about it. We want to avoid it. We want to get on with it. We want to numb it. We want to drink ourselves into oblivion. We want to eat ourselves into oblivion. We want to do this. And all of those things are perfectly fucking fine. Okay. There's no judgment here. When it becomes a process that prevents you from feeling it, that's where I get concerned. Okay. So even if you can manage a story, talking about their name, putting their name in the chat tonight, doing all of those things that, you know, we've asked you to do, it is like a little bit of that pressure cooker allowing you to lean in to the things that were the good parts of them. And I think that you do not have to sink into joy. I love this note from Cheryl. It doesn't feel right to feel joyful yet because I want my dad to be there. Yeah, okay. No right way. If you do not want to belly laugh and find some joy, don't. That's okay. It's okay. But we often feel guilty in this process for being happy when somebody is dying or when we have lost somebody. How do we have the right? Because we didn't see it coming or we didn't spend enough time or we didn't, my God, the guilt that is infused in grief is often not talked about. And you have to name it to tame it. Okay. It is so a part of grief. And it's normal. It really is. That word regret, I think, is the thing that keeps so many of us just isolated. And it is a constant shift on purpose into the things and the times where there was joy, there was laughter. If you didn't get any moments with your baby because they didn't take a first breath, you think about the pregnancy. You think about the moments of joy, even if you puked your guts out for 3 months. If you lost somebody by suicide, you will spend a lot of time thinking about the things you missed, the things you should have done, you could have done more. Do your very best to not let that overshadow all of the times that you belly laughed, they fucking drove you nuts, that they said things that you were like ridiculously amazed by, the things that they showed up for you, the things that they did for you. If you are in a state of sort of trying to say goodbye to somebody, I don't want you to focus on all the things that you didn't do right or for them. So much about this is about the process of hanging into things that that brought you joy, because all of them, they're there. If you look hard enough, and sometimes I believe to the core of me, if you ask, they'll send them to you. So those are my 3, Jared, that I'm going to sink into. Name it, celebrate them, and find joy in this fucking holiday season. Fuck you, holidays. Yeah. That's what I feel like saying. But
Fa
it's
la
fine.
la la, you know, like it's just like sometimes we just want to hop up on the doorstep and do a little Christmas caroling because we're just so fucking joyful about all this heavy shit that we're bringing into the holidays.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Any comments?
Yeah, listen, a few things I want to touch base on. Like, it's hard to see people we care about go through hard things. I don't ever want to get good at that. That's not the skill that I want to hone in on to know how to walk through these things. So what I want you to feel and what I want Aaron to feel and I want your kids to feel is that, you know, it is not our responsibility to show up, but the perfect sequence of word is it is our responsibility to show up and for you to feel us here with you. Because in all of the ways that you talked about, Rhea, we experience loss to the level in which we experience relationship.
Mhm.
All of the things that are going to make it so hard to say goodbye to your mother-in-law and to say goodbye to this grandma and this mom means she took the time to be a mom. And it means she took the time to be a grandma. And it means she took the time to piss you off once in a while, but mostly out of a place of love.
Mostly. Yeah.
Mostly. There's incredible privilege in that. Because we've sat at the table with people who didn't leave anybody like that behind. They forgot to slow down for long enough to experience relationship in the midst of trying to make a life for themselves.
Right.
And so I think the part of it I wanted to revisit was like, you know, these harsh realities that we cognitively are so aware of. Like, we know they're not ours to hold forever, but the first time I have to do this without you, whether you're still alive or whether you're gone, comes with a very, like, it's a gut punch. And I think our response is like, we don't realize how much they did for us, or we took it for granted. And we don't take it for granted. We love these people with our whole hearts. And we've taught our children to love these people with their whole hearts, and we showed them how to do it. I think it's not a matter of us taking it for granted. I think it's just a recognition of how much different our life is going to be without them. And there's just no getting ready for that part.
And we do the best we can with what we got in any given moment, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that when you have the luxury, if you will, of sitting back and looking over somebody's life that is gone, you have the moment of getting sleep or a shower, or, you know, you didn't go back to the hospital that night, or you didn't invite them over for dinner that night, or why didn't you say these things? In the moment, I truly believe this. We do the best we can with what we got on any given moment. And when we're regulated and filled up, it's like, why didn't I? Why didn't I? Why didn't I? Why didn't I? Like, grief is a fuckery, because it really sort of makes you question all of those things. But I will tell you, I know this to the core of me as a psychologist, is that we do the best we can with what we got on any given moment. And there is never a time where we didn't do the best we could have, because we would have done something differently if we had that process. Okay.
Yeah,
and so I think that's really critical to talk about.
And I think it's so important for like everybody that's here, like, you know, reading these stories about children dying and about people dying by suicide or parents dying or whatever the circumstance is in which you lost this person that you love so much. Like, all of those things, like, you feel like you took for granted, or all of those things like you feel like you fucked up in those final moments, or that you could have done differently. I'm here to tell you, the person that you cared so much about felt, it's tangible. We feel the sincerity of how people show up for us.
Okay, can I ask you to talk about one thing, because I really I'm going to talk about it too, because I'm going to bring it up, and I want you to sort of I love your conversation about this. The days surrounding the death matter way more than the death itself. I want to talk about right now the acts of love, the levels of care. As a funeral director, when you say things like, this is my favorite thing, you know, when somebody passes away and you say, I'm going to look after them tonight. Your mom is safe with me tonight. I got it. It is, you know, the food that comes over, the things, the noticing of how much that person actually, you know, meant to people tonight. You know, the churches where Lori served so well here in this community. I mean, they're getting together tonight to have a meeting, but so much of it is going to be about her. I think about, you know, I tell a story in Feeling Seen about Bill, a man named Old Bill in our community. And I wonder a little bit, I think I seen a note that maybe his daughter is on tonight. That dad brought so much joy to my son. And in Feeling Seen, it's one of the last stories in the book, because my Asher struggled with, you know, when he was 11 years old, making friends. I can't remember if I told you the story, Jared, but he struggled significantly. He came home one day when he started middle school, and he was playing his ukulele, which is the #1 indicator about why he didn't have any fucking friends. But anyway, it was fine. I'm so proud of him. And he comes through the door, and I was like, "What?" He says to me, "I made a new friend at school." And I was like, "With your ukulele?" And he's like, "Yes." And I said, oh my God, I'm so excited. What's his name? And he said, Old Bill. I said, there's a kid in the middle school named Old Bill. He's like, no. When I was walking home today last week playing my ukulele, a guy who's named Old Bill was standing on his deck and he commented on my playing. And now we talk every day after school. I went up on his deck today and we played the music together. And I really, really love this guy. I was like, I thought you would be worried about that, Mom. So Old Bill would like to meet you tomorrow. I go to Old Bill's house. He's the most remarkable retired school teacher who has found something in my son that nobody else seen in a very long time. We had ice cream on Old Bill's deck. Asher would stop every Monday and Wednesday and have a conversation about life. And as Old Bill had gifted him a beautiful a microscope that he'd used in his teaching days. And he was getting a little bit sicker. And when we got the news that Old Bill had passed away, I have never seen my personal tiny human cry that hard. And he said, how do you lose a best friend when your best friend's 93? And I am so grateful to Bill to this moment for teaching my baby about loss and friendship, and that age and race and religion and socioeconomic status has nothing to do about relationship, and that grief is as big when you know somebody for 5 months than when you can know them your whole lifetime. And it is so much about being seen in our relationships that really is the legacy that leaves us behind. And when we think about navigating our own grief in this season, when you know that everybody else is walking this, you give it away. You give it away this season to the best of your ability, and you will leave marks on people's lives so that when they come to your funeral, this is the stories they're going to be telling. Huh? Tell me about that. And there's some questions coming in, so you keep going.
Yeah, listen, I think what we get to learn and what's so beautiful about these experiences and these conversations is like how deeply we recognize how the old Bills exponentially change who our children will become. And it's just like these small acts of being intentional about relationship.
Yeah.
And, I think that almost segues beautifully just back into this idea of the importance of the way that we use words when people we love die, and kind of to address the thing that you were asking or talking about. But I know for us, it just complements the idea that death ends life, not relationship. That when we go to that hospital, that when we have to meet you in this unthinkable space, when I see Sandy's here, when you have to hand us your baby to bring home for you in a way that we're not supposed to bring our babies home, I just need you to know that she's safe. And I just need to know that in all the ways that we know how, we are going to take care of her, right? And that is just rooted in relationship. That when my mom dies, even though what's left of her at that hospital is just this shell, it is the shell that housed me, it is the shell that housed my brother, it is the shell that raised us, it is the shell that was never really good at cooking but overgave on love.
We love you, Mom.
Yeah, right. And so
yes, it matters so much.
We need to know that they're safe. We need to know that they're still being cared for. We need to know that we didn't just go from being at the hospital or from being sick, that there were steps, that there were these acts of love and acts of care between being at the hospital and being at the cemetery, or being at the hospital and coming home with this box of ashes that apparently is dad or grandpa or whoever this person is that we last saw. And that's, I think that's really brings me into this place of something I hope we can roll into tonight, is the importance of how do we introduce our children into these conversations.
Yes.
Can I roll with it? I think, are we
rolling roll with it? And I have a couple of really great questions for you too. So yeah, roll with kids and grief. I'm going to give you all the space for that because I think that's a big question. we'll do with that.
Yeah, and I think it's probably going to address, a lot of the things, because I think that, and honestly, this probably could have been a part of my introduction. As the space of death ed continues to grow, it started from like a very organic idea of wanting to learn how to walk alongside children during times of loss, and not just walk alongside them, but also let them lead us, through parts of that experience, because they're so well equipped. And that is something I got to learn as a funeral director, by just being intentional about creating space for kids to be a part of this process.
Yeah.
And so I penciled a few notes that I thought are really important about how to talk to kids about hard things. So listen, here's 4 quick takeaways. Is if you are going through something, once we've gone through this idea of inward before outward, like where we honor ourselves and we honor our own parts, now I get myself to this place of genuinely feeling like I can start to show up for these little people that we love so much, right? I think what's really important about grief is, regardless of age, we are not entitled to somebody else's grief. That it's really important that we ask for permission to join them, right? And that has to include the kids. That when you get home and it's been
Tell me about that.
Right? So I just think of like some, and especially for, I think, personalities like ours, where like we know we have something to offer, and it's really easy to insert yourself into somebody's space without being invited into it, right?
Yeah.
So it changes the entire process. It changes the entire experience when we stop at the initial parts of those conversations and say, hey, is it okay if we talk a little bit more about what's happening with grandma right now?
Ooh. Okay.
Right?
Love that.
So, like,
Permission. Number
permission.
1.
And then like number 2, listen, this is something I learned from this lady I met in concert one night. Her name's Dr. Jody Carrington, and she talked about lid flips. So we need to feed them like they're staying at the neighbors. We cannot enter into these conversations if they are not regulated. And the easiest way for us to keep kids emotionally regulated is to make sure that they're eating and drinking. And I could do 20 minutes on just that, but that's as simple as I'm going to keep it. The reality of what we've learned about children, and why when you come to the funeral home, there's an excessive amount of fruit snacks and juice boxes and things like that.
Fuck nutritional value.
Yeah.
One of the greatest gifts I think I ever give, and I will tell you this because, during a funeral, there's beautiful people in this community that I love very much. And one of the things that I thought about during was care packages for their children. Because when you go to say goodbye to your mother or your father or somebody that really loves, the big people are wrought with their own grief. And what we sometimes forget about is the babies. And so when you think about bringing gifts, I mean, I one of the things I often think about is like, can you bring all the candy and the chocolate bars and the Play-Doh and the things that might be helpful, deliver that instead of the next lasagna, although lasagnas are fucking great. But like how wonderful it is to think about the other people in that process, what it would mean for them to just be like, okay, I'm going to take that to the funeral. Okay. And here kids like Letterbuck, hang on to this, right? Because it's like, I think that's sort of some of the things. You can't regulate a kid with a carrot stick, because you don't want a carrot stick in a time. I'm not going to have a salad because I'm so sad. Fuck that. I'm eating all the things and the wine and stuff. So I think it's like, I think that to your point, you can't chew and swallow with a flip lid. And when you process grief, mourning happens when your lid is on. Grief happens often when your lid is flipped.
Perfect. Yes, I'm with
Great.
you. And which is great. You just got the rest of that part from the quality at the source, from the person that taught me so much about that. And I think because now what we do is like, so now you've allowed me to join you in this space because I asked for permission. I've created an environment where I can watch, where I can see the visual cues of whether you're staying regulated or whether we start to lose you. And as soon as I start to lose you, get some more fucking juice in you or get something in you, because like we need to keep talking about hard things here. And, so it gives me as the adult in the room, like the ability to visualize when I'm watching these big things creep up on you. Right. And then I know that you have immediate access to this tool for us to continue learning about this really big stuff. And then here's the kicker. You have to be incredibly honest, and you have to deliver it in a way that is completely real. Kids can smell the bullshit before their feet hit the floor in the morning. We need to approach these conversations with age-appropriate truths that allow us to show children that although there's big emotion attached to people we love dying, we don't have to be scared. That fear is not purposeful in grief, even though we are going to be feeling sad, even though we are going to be feeling angry, even though we are going to be bargaining, even though that we are going to feel all of these things. The thing that we do not need to feel is fear, right? And how do we do that? Is just by giving them the parts of the like the entirety of the truth that is appropriate for the age that they're at. And like, so these things take some practice, of course. I think it's really important that you know that like, I've been doing this for 18 years and fuck it up constantly with my own children, like constantly, right? Because we bring all of our own shit into it, whether we try to or not. And the thing about that though, is like, we have to remove the pressure from getting it right. And I talked to Jody about this earlier off camera. In my experience of grief, the only thing that comes out of pressure in environments of grief is guilt and shame. And guilt and shame serve no purpose in what we're trying to do here, right? So number one, we're gonna ask for permission. Number two, we're gonna make sure we're feeding them like nobody's watching. Number three, we're gonna get real. We're gonna be very honest with them. And number four is something we already talked about, which is leading with excruciating vulnerability. If I want you to tell me,
where's Grandpa's glasses? Did you cut off his legs?
right,
That's my favorite story. Can you tell that story? In the
when my grandpa passed away, and again, like I was in this really, and this is like, I think really hard for some people to understand, but for me, like so amazing. I got to take care of 3 out of my 4 grandparents after they died. And one of that was like flying to Yuma to embalm one of my grandfathers to make sure we got him home safely. And so like was very involved in the levels of care that each of these people were offered, because they were very involved in the levels of care it required to raise a child like Jared. And so, you know, it was just like this opportunity to reciprocate all of this love that I was offered throughout my life. And my grandparents on that side of the family, this is my mom's parents, were especially religious. And so a lot of my behavior doesn't align with some of their belief systems, but we met in the space of relationship. And I remember being at the church the night before. So like we had the viewing at the church because this was just a space that was very meaningful to my grandpa. And he was up at the front of the church. And I remember like asking in all of these same steps, asking my cousins, these little people's moms and dads, is it okay if I take the kids in? Is it okay for me to go and help explain how all of these things we've been doing for Grandpa, even though that he's died, is an act of love? It's a way for us to extend this care that we've offered, this relationship transitions into end of life care, transitions into afterlife care. So like just walked through these steps with them. And it's like, I gave these kids a fucking TED talk on what happens when people we love die, and feel like there was nothing I could have missed. There was nothing left I had to offer that conversation because of how well I had just explained everything that had happened to their great grandpa.
Yep.
Other than the fact that caskets are what they call half couch, which means they have 2 lids. And so we typically, and again, where we are at in the world, the practice is to only open the top half of the casket. So all we see of Grandpa is from his waist to the top of his head, him laying on this pillow, which led all of these little people to believe that Grandpa no longer had legs. And so we had to just like, and it's just like, these are the things that are so magical about bringing kids into the conversation. Like, what a quick remedy to be able to say, well, of course Grandpa still has his legs. Let me just open up the foot end of this casket and show you his pants and his dress shoes and these clothes that he wore to church every Sunday. That in every respect, even though he has died, you know, physically, the presence that you see is everything that will remind you of your great grandpa, right? And I think these things become so important. Like the takeaway from these is just that, what happens if we don't create the opportunity or the space for these children to participate, and they start taking that stuff home with them?
Yeah.
Because if nobody shows them how, they're not going to bring it up at bedtime. if mums and dads and grandpas and grandmas aren't talking about how big of an impact it is that my mom died, that if I've lost my grandma, I'm 7, 8, 5 years old, I'm cognitively able to recognize that that's your mom. You're sitting here telling me you're fine, but it's okay if I feel the emotion.
Oh my gosh. And can I just say, aunties, uncles, best friends, all of those, this is one of your biggest jobs, is to provide that opportunity and ask those questions. Tell me more about grandma. What do you tell me about your sister? Right? How do you, giving those opportunities? And if it's not the right time, you'll fucking know it. But we are so scared to ask so much. And this leads me to a question. I love this. There's a question that somebody just put in, not just, but a little while ago. Amanda asked, what is the right thing to say to someone? I hated being or hearing, I'm so sorry, and they are in a better place. Do you have any takes on that, Jer? Some sort of like quick takeaways that, you know, you have learned over the years that is like, this one lands typically a bit better than most?
Yeah, I feel like, I think what's always so
Here to
difficult
come up with
about,
what not to say, because I think we could have a list there.
yeah,
right?
that would be easier, right? Because it's just like, here's the thing,
Yeah.
my experience is that I really believe that words will typically fall short, but intention is always felt. And so trying to construct again the perfect thing to say. Now, I also think we're getting to a stage of life where it's appropriate to to correct certain behavior or certain things that are said so that they don't say it again. Because they don't know until they know. It's because if something were to ever happen to one of my children and your response was, God needed another angel, well, I have a lot to take up with my God then at some point in time, because that little angel needs to be home with me. That's where I need them. That is the better place for them, right? And so I think there's this balance is bullshit. I'm with you on this. But there's this, I think we can begin to learn to lean into this idea that if people say something and your response is that it's hurtful, tell them. They don't know, you know, and there's a nice way of doing that. Like it doesn't,
Often,
it needs,
when we're full of emotion, we're like, fuck you.
yeah.
And like, at least you lived to see 72. You know what, bitch? You should have went first. Like, those are the things that sort of like come out. So the time is critically important. If you can help it. If you can, it's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, so think about.
And the other part too is like, if you're the person trying to find the right thing to say, there's also something really powerful about showing up and saying, I don't know what to say other than.
Sometimes there are no words.
Right.
And I see Cherry just said this. Someone said to me, I hope the love you have for your daughter is stronger than your grief. She said, I love that. That's a beautiful line.
Yeah, and I'll share one other thing with you that I just heard this year for the first time. And this is really geared towards the people that are trying to learn how to walk alongside other people in their loss. And, you know, I don't have permission from this family, so I won't use a very specific example, but this person lost their spouse and they were having an incredibly difficult time with it, as they should be. And they were out for a walk and one of the neighbors just stopped, you know, was driving by and stopped. And this is out in the country. And he said, listen, I wanted to just check in on you. I just wanted to touch base with you. And he just asked questions. He, you know, like, what does it look like to be helpful? That's my words. Like I always say that. What does it look like to be helpful? Don't let me assume. But then here's the part that I want you to pay attention to, the thing that I thought was so amazing. All he did was create space for this person to talk about their spouse. And he just listened without expectation, without judgment. And when they were done talking, he said, it sounds like you have a lot to carry right now. And I know I can't do it for you, but let me carry it for you for today. Let me carry it for you for the next hour. I know at some point in time, you're going to have to come and take this back from me. But if you could just let me carry them for you for this next hour so that you can have some space to yourself. They're safe with me. I will honor this grief. I will take care of this grief. And I will recognize that there's a time that it's yours to take back, that this is yours to carry, but just let me take it for you for now, right?
I love that, Jer. I'm noticing too, Sandy's here. Kathy Decker's here. This is Avery's mom from Avery's Legacy. I know we both love Kathy. I think, this is really lovely when, people are like, probably saying like everything happens for a reason is fucking dumb if you can try not to do that. But the other thing is that, naming, this is awful. This sucks. Here's the thing that I think is really critical. You and I, in this very moment, will be in the position of being the walker and the walkie. So we have been in positions where people have said fucked up stuff to us that we would like to throw punch them around. But we've also been the person who has been inclined to say fucked up things in an effort to help somebody else. You play those two roles. You're not always in your life in this version of just receiving people who are fumble fucking their way to try to get it right to help you feel better. You also have been the fumble fucker. Okay. So grace in this moment is also really important. Okay. Because people are not trying to crush your soul. It happens for a reason. God got another angel. They are wanting to alleviate your pain, because what we want for most people is for them to be emotionally regulated. We don't want to see you hurt. The more you mean to me, the more they meant to me. I want to fix it. I wanted to fix it for Ria's babies. I wanted to just take it away for Sean. I wanted to do it. And people that I didn't even know, if I've sat in the back row of a funeral, I just like, oh God, people make shit and they want to bring shit and they want to do things. And they want to because we don't want people to feel it. And then I think that's the number one rule of Fight Club, is that you actually have to feel it. So if you can say anything that just makes space for the feelings, tell me more about them. Here's a story about them. Here, what's the hardest part? Let me hold those things. I think all of that stuff, I'll carry your grief for a while if you let me. In fact, I'm just going to stand alongside you when you tell me about it. I think that is a safe bet every time. And listen, it's 100% okay if you fuck it up, because I think one of the baddest moves is to not say anything at all. I think avoiding at all costs is what we do. And I say, oh my God, Jared, did you see this comment in here? Somebody was like, somebody said to her husband, leave the crying for the women. Get out here.
Those uncles are having a really hard time right now in the world, just to like add into this part of the conversation again, I think the thing that like is just at like, again, the foundation of so much of this topic of grief is like this idea of acknowledgement, that like when you show up for these people, I can guarantee you the expectation is not for you to fix this for them, because what you are about to talk about cannot be fixed. Right. But like, I'm like leaning on the quote that you and I have talked so much with Parker Palmer about acknowledgement. The human soul does not want to be advised or fixed or saved. It simply wants to be witnessed exactly as it is. So what changes about grief when we show up without an expectation to fix or without an expectation to make this better, and we just simply start to see each other exactly where we are in our loss? Well, I am here to tell you, it changes everything about grief. It changes the entire trajectory of who we will allow to join us in that space, because the only people that are invited in are the people that actually see me here, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
I
so,
love that. And I think, too, I'm just listening or watching, Rhonda Watts, who's one of my favorite souls on the planet. And Jessie Bell is saying things like, friends who have not said anything since my dad died, I have become far more distant from. And I want to talk a little bit about that, in your experiences of grief. If I think about my experiences of grief, isn't it interesting that some people surprise you? Who shows up surprises you, and who doesn't sometimes surprises you too. Can you tell me a little bit about why you think that is?
I think, listen, especially, I'm going to continue to talk about grief, of course, in this lens of like when people we love die, even though it's such a broader topic. But when people we love die, when people that we had skin in the game with die, there was a life before that death, meaning when we were able to feel that physical presence, which is irreplaceable, and then there's life that takes place again after. And the thing is like not good or bad, not saying which is better or worse or anything like that. It's just saying there's these two separate lives, because like it changes who we become,
Yep.
but it also changes the people around us.
Yeah.
Because they are so afraid of saying the wrong thing. But then like there are going to be people in your life that have had parallel experiences, which is not to say they are the same, that have had parallel experiences that know that our only responsibility is to show up, right? I think of like Robert Grattan, this beautiful old guy that is a Knights of Columbus that I just showed up at my grandpa's funeral and just made sure to stop to talk to me, even though he has nothing to do with me. But now every time I see Robert, I just think of like that intentional thing that he did. Right?
The core memories that happen so I don't know if you remember this movie. It's a little bit old now, but it's like, what is it called? It's the kids movie with the 5 emotions.
Oh, Inside Out.
Yes. When they talk about core memories, okay, there are so many core memories that are built around processes of grief and loss because emotions are so in tune and acute. Okay. I remember to this day, my grandmother walking out of the hospital, me walking alongside her for the first time in my life, seeing a tear in her eye. I remember what it smelled like in the hospital. I remember what she was wearing. I remember all of those things. And he's been gone for 30 years. Okay. It's fascinating to me, the things that are remembered and that people sort of take note of during those moments, like the massive pile of beef jerky that we got last week and like the 3 bottles of red wine. This was a care package. 50 is a bit excessive. Pounds of beef jerky and 3 bottles of red wine. I was like, thank you. Right? But it's so, I will never forget those moments. And I think an act of service is never lost. And so really, I think we get sort of debilitated by this idea that we're going to get it wrong, so we don't do it at all. And I think sometimes learning in that process.
Yeah. I've got like something that is just so good to add into that. And I think there's 2 parts just to quickly add in for the next question. But is the first thing is like the thing that I've learned over and over about grief from this environment of when people die. When somebody you love dies, you don't want to talk about bullshit things. Careers matter less in that moment. The weather doesn't matter at all in that moment. It doesn't matter how much gas is. So all of these conversations that we've sometimes been having in these other environments, we realize how superficial they are. So I think a part of that separation of where we start to see who shows up, well, it is the people that are capable of meaningful conversation. And when you've walked through something so difficult, you don't have time for the bullshit anymore. I'm only creating space for the people that are here for meaning, because here's what we know about David Kessler and the ways that he talked about is eventually we get to a space in our loss that all of this emotion also at some point in time transitions and provides meaning in loss, that there's meaning attached to this grief, which doesn't mean it's going to give you an answer for it, but hopefully it creates this new space. And the other thing that I want to make sure that we talk about is just like this fear of like saying the wrong thing or bringing them up or saying their name. Is it's hard to hold people responsible because they're doing the best they can with what they have, because nobody's shown them how. So then that means it's up to us to start to show them how. And I know that Kathy's on here, and I know that Tara's on here, and I've been seeing names like Avery, and I've been seeing names like Mackenzie and these little people. Here's what I can tell you with certainty. There is nobody more aware of Mackenzie's missing presence than her mom and her dad. And that when you say her name, you are not reminding them that she's gone. They know that. They remember that most hours and minutes of the day. You're reminding them that it's safe to continue to talk about her. You're reminding them that she will forever be a part of their life. That's what we remind them when we say their name. It may be accompanied by big emotion, of course, but saying their name creates permission to say, this is a safe place for you to tell me more.
Mm-hmm. And I really love, there's such great conversations that are happening, right now in the chat. I think there's one question I have, like, what do you do when, so Amanda sent this question, what do you do when it has to be a closed casket and the family doesn't get that last goodbye? I find the closure with this is huge, but we couldn't have that with dad in this particular case. So what's your experience with sort of like, do people have choices about opens and closed caskets anymore? Is there data around that that's helpful? What if you can't do it because of an accident or, an illness that is so debilitating to the body? Like, tell me about the openness, closeness of caskets, the visitations.
Yeah, sure. I think, the most important part of that conversation about having a viewing or there being that visitation is the opportunity to say yes or no, right? And again, like bringing our children into this conversation, that we don't start making these decisions on behalf of other people. And I would say it's incredibly difficult when circumstances require the funeral home or the funeral director to have to lend their experience to say, I don't think I would recommend having a viewing, but I have to be able to back that up with understanding, that there has to be a reason, because in my entire career, I think I've had to do that less than 10 times, because we will go to such great lengths to create that opportunity for families that choose, to want to see that person again.
Okay.
But
Do you
it
think
does
that's
happen.
really important?
I think the opportunity is important. I think I'm uninvested on whether you have to see them again. I think being able to choose is important, right?
Okay.
Because again, when we choose on behalf of somebody else, now I'm making decisions about your grief, right?
Yes.
And the thing is like, this is also like goes into these trust building exercises. Like, so I'm really going to stay focused, say, with kids, but this really applies well as into adulthood also, where, well, mom didn't want an open casket. Well, that's great. She probably didn't want the rest of the CWL to see her again because they're just going to talk about it in the kitchen, right? But I bet if I had the chance to sit with that grandma or that mom, if I were to say to you, like, is it appropriate to see if any of your kids or any of your grandchildren want to see you once more before the burial takes place or before the cremation takes place? And here's the thing, 95% of the time, they're going to follow your lead because you're showing them how. And they're going to likely honor, what you wanted, or that if your wish was to not be viewed, that very well might impact what their decision is. But the thing that becomes really important is that we don't make those decisions on behalf of the other parts of the family, right? And,
Oh,
I think there's a
that's
boundary on that. Like, my nuclear family in those conversations is children and grandchildren. Like, God bless our brothers and sisters, and God bless these other aunts and uncles and cousins or people like that. But it doesn't serve us well to try to take care of everybody. So this is where I'll say, be intentional about who's in that nucleus, to be able to say, this is who we're including as a part of these decisions, because it's impossible to serve all of these relationships.
Yes. And I'm noticing this, like, Jer, when you had Tyson tuck Adley in one last time, that was huge. Sandy's story is phenomenal. I think that when we sort of, sometimes it's like, part of the issue is, even I think about like Livy and our kids, even if you have 3 kids, being able to say, you have to go in and see grandma, you have to go in and say this things, be very careful about that, right? Because we want to just give, I think, a lot of choice in those moments, and we're scared, will you regret it? Will they regret it if they don't? There is no finality in that last decision. Part of the biggest, I think, message we can give is that you will always have a connection. Writing a letter, sending up something, visiting, saying those words, even if they're in your head and you don't want to say them out loud. There is no right way to do this. And there's no data that would suggest if you view, you're better at grief. If you don't, you're not. If you do it like this, if you don't do that, give so much grace in this process. I think making those decisions when you're regulated is so critically important. Look at me and let's think about this together. Let's take a drink. Let's get a coffee. We can decide together whether this is something we're brave enough to do. And if you're not, that's okay. Right? I think not in those moments being like, decide. we're in or we're out, you know, and I think that the funeral directors that piss me off the most, and I love many of you, is just the necessity to get the importance of regulating emotion in that process. If it
Right.
takes more time, it takes more time. If I need to slow you down, not like everybody alongside here, okay? Families here. I mean, and that's not, I mean, I haven't met anybody like that in a very long time. I've met some of them.
I'm not sure what movies you're watching. I don't think it happens quite like that. But I will say that, you know, in the context of like of time, like in the context of like, just think about how big the decisions we are making within the days of somebody we love dying. We just moved to an acreage. It took us like 3 months to pick a washer and dryer. And now I'm going to walk you into the selection room to choose the casket for your mom or your dad or your whoever. And, you know, I'll be back in about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so we do need to create an understanding of like how huge these decisions we're making are in a very concentrated amount of time, right? That we are not offered the opportunity, which is why it becomes so important to make sure that everybody is making the decisions that they feel are appropriate to them. And I'm going to use a good example of this outside of a funeral home setting, but still in a setting of loss, and especially with kids. So this past September, our family dog, like our old English bulldog Brian, died, and we had to reasonably quickly, you know, make the decision that he needed to be put down, that he had a really bad day that required us to. So it was just like, I had one of my daughters was at a sleepover, one of my other daughters was at a friend's house having a fire. Bowen was home with us, our son was home with us, and it was just like, you know, needed to kind of quickly get these things together in a way that created the opportunity for them to be present or participate if they wanted to. And again, I want to be mindful of time, so I won't tell the entirety of the experience, but the part of the experience I want to share with you is our son Bowen is 6 years old. We don't know everything that's a part of Bowen's world yet. We're still trying to figure some of the things out that happened for him. But one of the things I know to be true is Bowen doesn't communicate well about emotion, that he gets really quiet, that it's really hard for him, that even when we have accessibility to the tools, it's difficult for him. And I remember walking through these steps with that final night with Brian, and we created the opportunity for each of our kids to be present when we went through the steps of euthanizing them. Mm-hmm. And what we said, you know, was, we will do this together as a family, but how we do that is up to you. Meaning, we are going to go together, but there's a safe space for you, that you don't have to be in the room, that you don't, you know. And so we created opportunity that in this time that felt out of control, we made it more controllable by letting them make decisions that were appropriate for their age. And Bowen's thing was, he didn't really want to be a part of it. So we made him feel safe, and we made him feel confident in that decision. We found a space for him to feel that safety once we got to the vet's office. He kind of came in and out of the room a little bit, but for the most part didn't participate. Beautiful. And when we got home that night, you know, of course, it was accompanied with big emotion, because by all means, for my children, that was the closest relationship they'd ever lost in their life. Because they weren't close with my grandparents. They didn't have a relationship with them like they did with Bri. Yeah. And I remember getting home, and we started a fire, and I poured a drink, and we were going to have this fire for Brian. And Bowen said, he said, "Dad, I really miss Bri." I said, "Yeah, man, me too. Can you tell me why you miss him so much?" And he said, "Well, I miss him so much because I've never seen you and Mom so sad." So now this little boy who doesn't communicate well about emotion was not only able to tell us that he's feeling these big things, he actually was able to name the thing that he was feeling, right? And all of this happens as a result of simply creating space for them to be a part of the process, that we honor the decisions they make. We set guidelines, we set boundaries for what we will be and won't be doing as a family, but that as much as possible, I'm going to honor your parts of this grief, that you're an active decision maker, which is going to make this great big thing that feels like your world is spinning out of control feel more controllable. And I think it's a really wonderful thing for us to be able to offer, because when we enter into what I will say it will be much more meaningful loss for them, when their grandpas and grandmas die, when their moms and dads die, God forbid if they ever lose children of their own or one of their siblings die, they are going to remember those experiences, and they are going to remember that one thing we can count on is each other, and we know how to honor each other in those spaces.
Oh my gosh, and honoring your feelings in those moments. Well, I'm going to wrap up tonight with just a few final thoughts, Jared. I want you to consider this too. You know, the purpose of tonight is to talk about how we handle big emotions in this holiday season. And there's so much anticipation about getting this right and feeling the joy and being all fucking lovey and stuff. I really want you first to be able to name it and honor it. However you want to show up, that is your right, your responsibility. You feel it when you need to feel it. When we try to hide and suppress and do things that are expected of us, those emotions aren't honored and they continue to take notice in our bodies until we notice them. Okay, so they get louder and they push us around, and sometimes they make us have physical symptoms. And so the three things I would think about, I don't even know if there's three, but I'll just tell you my thoughts. You know, this season is full of expectations and it's full of massive emotions, which is ripe for grief to come in and rear its fucking ugly head. It is also beautiful opportunities for mourning, which is to the best of your ability, honor those spaces where you don't feel the joy and then gently seek to find it. Notice the signs or tell the stories that, you know, make you laugh. It's okay in those moments. You can go back to that safety of pain and sadness if you want to, because you feel like you need to be justified in that place. You can always go back. But I really want you to think about giving yourself some permission to step into those moments of the joy that anybody you are remembering tonight or thinking about or anticipating losing brought you. Brought your family, brought your children, brought your household, your workplace, whatever that looks like. And lean into that this season a little bit. You can feel it all. Do the crying, eat the cookies, do the things, and please, on purpose, at least for a couple of times, steal those moments, just you and them, in your head, in your heart, with something that they wore or they loved. Feel it, feel the emotion, and then seek some of that joy, because that is, I think, what is so necessary in this feeling. Big emotional holiday time is don't fucking run from it. Dive in as much as you can. Take a breather. Dive in again. That would be my biggest wish for you tonight. It's going to be what our family is going to try to do. It's going to be what I'm going to try to show my kids how to do. And every year when we hang, you know, we have ornaments on the tree, you know. So Aaron and I lost a baby between the twins and Asher, and we have an ornament that, you know, is for that baby, that year that we lost that baby. And you know, I think about all the other things that you know, when we hang the ones from Maria. Kathy gave me a beautiful one from Maria. It's those moments that I really want you to hold space for, because I think sometimes that's the thing that when we name it, we tame it. So listen, I mean, I know, Jerry, you have a few more words. So anything you want to leave in the moment?
Yeah, and honestly, just to compliment what you just said, I think the part that is so important is like this feeling in order to be able to name it. The thing that we've learned about these big emotions is like we don't get to choose which ones we push down. That if you try to push one down, you're going to push all of them down. And so like grief to me is this like wonderful place that we get to like extend relationship into. It is the place that we get to continue to feel the presence of the people we love that are gone. And that is going to become very difficult at moments. That's going to come with a lot of sorrow, and that's going to come with be like accompanied by tears, and it's going to be really difficult. And the thing is sometimes what we do is we try to like mute some of those experiences, or we try to push them down so we don't have to feel them so deeply. But impossible to me to push this part down, but still want to feel joy at its fullest level. And so the thing again is like just leaving you with this, like this, one of the most important lessons that I've learned about grief. Grief is one of the few, in my opinion, the only environment I've come across that two contrasting emotions cannot just be a part of the same moment or the same environment. They can be a part of the same moment. That we can be completely heartbroken that this person has died or that this person is dying. And at the exact same time, we can feel incredibly grateful, and we can feel all of the joy that continues to accompany that relationship.
Amen, my friend. I am so grateful for you in my life and your wisdom. just what you've taught me about this process. And so to all of you who've brought us, all of your people tonight, all of those names, I'm going to go back and read them again, your sons and your daughters and your moms and your dads. I really want you to know how much that means to us and how much we honor and see your vulnerability in this place, because we were never meant to do any of this alone. So Jer, thank you. Thank you to everybody. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. I want you to find some joy this season, because fuck, we deserve it. We deserve it. And I promise you that is what the people who have left us first really want to see. So let's show them how we do it. Good night, everybody. Good night.